Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. It's True Crime with Jess. I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Tuesdays are my request evening. Thursdays the stories that I like to bring to you. I am also over on the TikTok, which is JessRose5472. Or if you could join my Patreon, which is patreon.com/JessRose5472. Or you could just watch. No, you could like or comment. I'd appreciate that. Or you could just watch. And I appreciate that just as much. And now that I've got all that out of the way, tonight's story is the horrific Angela Simpson story. Now, no, I've got it the wrong way around. It's the horrific story of Angela Simpson. It might not sound important, but in my brain, the perpetrator is always the story of, victims always, it's their story. That's how I've always run my channel. So it's the horrific story of Angela Simpson. Okay, so that's it. But where we're going to start is we are going to start on the 5th of August 2009. Okay, that's where we're going to start the story. All right, so as I've said, on the 5th of August 2009 there was a fire burning behind the Covenant of Grace Church, and this was in the car park, and this is in Phoenix in Arizona. It is American story. Okay, now the fire was coming from a metal rubbish bin. All right, so it was actually just, it wasn't, I don't believe it was anyone from the church that noticed it. It was a passerby, just someone driving by, and they saw obviously this bin, flames quite high, so they call 911 and the fire brigade comes round. Okay, now when they arrive, they believe it's just rubbish. It's a rubbish bin. They believe maybe someone, maybe they've thrown a cigarette in there, something's happened. So anyway, as they're putting it out and they get closer to the fire, they realise that it wasn't just rubbish in the bin. It was a male body in the rubbish bin. Okay, so obviously they put the fire out, and then they realise that this male body has been dismembered and the body parts have been put in the bin and set on fire. Okay, it's an absolutely horrific sight. Fire brigade obviously weren't prepared for this at all. They called the police, they call everyone to come round. Like, my God, it's just not what they were expecting. Now when the body parts are removed from the scene, there's an autopsy done, and also they need to try and identify who this is. Who is this poor soul that's not only being thrown away into a rubbish bin, but has been thrown away after being quite obviously dismembered and set alight. So luckily they can get the fingerprints, and there's still, the fire was caught quite early, so they can find a lot of details out regarding who this man is. So when the autopsy is done, okay, what the coroner finds, even what the state the body was in, they could tell that the skull had been fractured. There was a 3-inch nail that had been forced into this poor man's head. Okay, they noticed that there was teeth missing, that he'd been stabbed. It was a really gruesome crime. Okay, and of course he's been dismembered. Both legs have been removed, and one of his arms. It's horrific. It's a horrific sight. Okay, now the reason they believed that this man had been through hell is because the injuries were beginning to heal, which means that he'd been alive when a lot of these injuries had been committed, right? Now the cause of death was actually came back as strangulation. So of course the manner of death, as if there was any question of it, is a homicide. All right. Now the detectives, when the coroner gets the fingerprints of the man, it comes back as a man who's actually been reported missing, and it's a man called Terry Neely. Okay. Now, Terry Neely is a 46-year-old man. He was born on October the 21st, 1962. Okay. Now, Terry was a paraplegic. Okay. He got around using a electric wheelchair. All right. He was well known in the local area. He could walk a couple of steps, but he basically relied on his wheelchair. He couldn't walk far. All right. Now he lived in an assisted living care facility. All right. He had a mental disability as well, so he needed help daily. He was an only child, and both of his parents had passed away, so he had no family at all. So his family were the staff at the care facility. Now, he did have a few friends, okay, not many, but the ones who were actually his friends, they said he was just such a kind man. He was actually a really kind, innocent, vulnerable man, but he was also very easily led. Okay, very sad. He was very easily led. He would say what he felt people wanted to hear as well, just to try and impress them. You know, it was just this need to have friends. We've done these stories many times. We genuinely have. And it's so sad, because they always come up against people who just aren't. They aren't who anyone would want to be friends with, let alone someone who is so vulnerable, so easy to take advantage of. And this is who Terry was. Okay. Now, he would, as I said, he was vulnerable. He was quite a lonely man, but it said he was happy. He was a happy fellow, you know. So you might be thinking, well, why him? What's he done? What could he have possibly done to have this been his ending? It's just awesome. So the detectives are obviously, they get all stuff they can to find out what happened to this man who didn't hurt anyone, who was harmless. Okay. Now, he was last seen on the 2nd of August 2009, which is 3 days before his dismembered body was found in that church car park. All right. And he was seen at around 8 p.m. Okay, now this was by the people at the housing facility. They'd seen him go out. Now, obviously, they didn't see him come back, and he was reported missing. All right. Now, they didn't know where he was going, so they couldn't tell the police where he'd gone, but just that he'd gone off in his wheelchair. And he seemed his normal, happy self. They weren't suspicious of anything. They weren't worried about where he was going. He seemed okay. And don't forget, Terry, as I've said, he's vulnerable. He's quite obviously disabled, but he is a 46-year-old man. So he has got that assisted, but it's what it's called. It's assisted living, so they can't stop him going out. So as I said, 8 p.m. off he goes, and you know, they. It's a shame, really, that I've said it before. You know, I've seen people who need help, and they have someone with them. You know, I've seen that. So I don't understand why he wouldn't have had someone who was going out with him. You know, the guy could hardly walk. As I've said, he had a mental disability. So why was he allowed to go out, especially at 8 p.m. at night? Why was that? Even though he's 46, I understand that, but why was that okay? I don't understand that. But an appeals are released to the public, okay, asking for any information. Had anyone seen him? Had anyone seen anyone hanging about the church car park around that time? You know, just any information whatsoever. And while they're waiting for any witnesses to come forward or any information, the detectives begin checking the CCTV from the church and the surrounding area. All right. Now, they spot on there a car leaving the car park of the church where Terry was eventually found. All right. Now, also on camera, remember I said they were checking the cameras of the surrounding area. They check a camera at a local petrol station, which is quite near the church, and there was a man known to the police filling up a jerry can. All right. Now, this man's called Edward McFarlane, okay, aka his name's Cracker. Okay, that's his street name. Some of the names, honestly, I say it every time. It's like, don't you get to choose your nickname sometimes? Can't you say, no, I don't really like that one? Can we try something else? But anyway, this is his nickname, okay? Now, he was known for petty theft, things like that, and also for driving a car like the one that he's seen on the CCTV leaving the church. All right. Now, the police pick up Edward later on that day. I've heard two stories. All right. I've heard that they pick him up later on that day. The second story I've heard is that he was already in custody through another crime, through a robbery. All right. So I've heard both of those. So I'll mention both. But when he's approached by the police, the only thing he says is, what took you so long? Okay. So, Edward, as I mentioned, there's this robbery that he was also wanted for. Again, if he was either brought in or he was already in custody for that, okay? Now, he committed that robbery with a woman called Angela Simpson, okay? Now, just like with Edward Cracker, there's two stories that either she was already in custody or she was picked up. All right, it doesn't change the course of events. I'm just pointing out both stories that I've heard. All right. So what they do, they bring both of them into the interrogation rooms. All right, and when they bring Angela in, it's not just because of the robbery, of course. It's because she's known for being an acquaintance of Terry Neely. Okay? Now, detectives had found out while the investigation was going on that Terry did have a drug habit, which again is in an assisted living facility. Were they aware of that? Was they trying to get him help? But he's got a drug issue, okay? And him and Angela, although they're only acquaintances, they were never friends, but he would take drugs with Angela, it was said, or he was seen anyway, outside an abandoned, it's like an abandoned apartment complex. It's an abandoned building, and they would be seen taking these drugs, okay? And this is also not far, this building, this abandoned building, is not far from the Covenant of Grace Church, again, where he was found, okay? Now, a witness comes forward. Now, don't forget, Edward and Angela are now picked up. They're in custody. So a witness comes forward to say that Edward had bragged to him that he'd been involved in burning Terry's body, okay? But he says, although apparently it was Angela killed him, he says he had been threatened not to open his mouth, but I'm presuming it's after he heard they'd been taken in, he came forward, okay? And not only that, as I've said, from what I can gather, Terry was really liked. He was really liked. He was harmless. So when people start to hear that he's been murdered, okay, and the two people that did it are now in custody, of course people are going to start coming forward. They're going to feel safe to come forward, all right? Now, so the detectives, they get a warrant, all right, to search Angela's apartment, okay? And when they go round there, what's the first thing they see? Outside of the apartment, now remember the abandoned building I mentioned, apparently Angela lives in one of those units, okay, so not quite abandoned. And when they come outside and they go round, I believe round the back, out there on the grass, just out in the open, is Terry's electric wheelchair. So of course they go straight into the apartment that they believe Angela's staying at. And when they walk in, it's very dingy, it's very dirty, it's a very grimy apartment. There's no carpet on the floor or anything. The walls are all stained and everything. It's not a nice place to live by any means. But there's no furniture. Zero. Except a chair with a full-length mirror in front of it. It's what they notice, and it looks very odd and out of place for a room that's got nothing else in it. It just looks quite odd. What they also notice is some pliers and some bleach, okay, and lots of blood on the floor and on the walls, on the ceiling. And then in another room, there's a dead cat and also a dismembered kitten. I mean, well, they say escalate from animals, don't it? That is what they say, but I just think, it's just awful. So the detectives head back to the station and they bring Angela back into the interrogation room, all right? And she sits there very calm. Now, I will explain an interview that I have watched with this lady, but the fact that in the interrogation she's very calm is not surprising at all. After you've watched her interview, which is online, you can see I think it's about 15 minutes long, the one I've seen anyway. And she turned round to the police, the detectives, and she says, look, I'll tell you everything, but I want a chocolate bar. It's what she asked for. And they're like, right, okay. So they give her the chocolate bar. And she opens it up and begins eating it. And in between bites, she starts talking, all right? Now, the interview that she gave to the police, I believe what she says to them is quite similar to what she says to the interviewer that you can see online, all right? And in it, her argument is Terry Neely was a snitch. She goes, he was a snitch. It was just too much. And the interviewer says, well, people lie about snitching. You know, people do that. And she was like, do they? You don't say. And he was like, well, you know, some people, you know, they might make up things, or, you know, they just can lie about snitching. She goes, do you have a list of those people? Quite calm. You know, her tone never goes up or down during the interview. It's so monotone throughout the whole interview, right up until the end anyway. But it's very unnerving to watch. Okay, she doesn't even really blink. She's just very calm, cool, calm and collected, I suppose you would say. And then she says, well, if he wanted to brag, he picked the wrong, and she says N-word. Okay. So she goes, yeah, if he wanted to brag, he picked the wrong one, basically. To say that too. And she goes, bragging about putting people in prison. You know, I'm not on that. And the interviewer says, do you believe him that he was really a snitch? And as I'm saying, she was so cold. She says, well, oops, if he wasn't. And then she stops and she goes, she says that. And I think because the interviewer was so taken back by her saying, well, oops, you know, if I got it wrong, she waits a second, then she says, look, I do believe he was a snitch. Okay? So, this is the interview. But except Terry wasn't a snitch. He wasn't. He wasn't known to any authorities. He didn't tell on anybody. People believe maybe he thought he was impressing her. I don't know why. And as I've mentioned, he did have a mental disability. And I don't... Did she perhaps lead him into the conversation? Maybe she showed an interest. And from her point of view, it's shown an interest to find out, you know, is he a grass? But from his point of view, he might have took that interest as, oh, you know, maybe I sound exciting to her. So he embellished it. And here's what happened. Okay. So when Angela was utterly convinced that he was in fact a snitch and he'd put people in prison, you know, for whatever crimes, okay, she knew what she wanted to do. So on the night of the 2nd, as I'd mentioned, when he leaves the care facility at 8 p.m, he heads over to meet Angela at that abandoned building. Okay? And what it was on the promise of drugs and sex. That was what it was. That was what it was on the promise of. Now, Angela herself, she's quite blunt when she says it. But she says, I don't know why the press are making out he couldn't walk. He could walk. Now, she throws a few words in between that, but that's what she's cutting at. And she says that when he got to the apartment, that's why his wheelchair was outside. She says he walked up those stairs to her apartment, or the apartment she was stopping in, or using, more to the point, using for as a drug den. I mean, let's face it, as I've described it to you, there was nothing in it, okay? Furniture-wise, should I say. So when they go in to the apartment, she lets him go ahead of her, and she comes up behind him with a tire iron almost straight away, and she beats him to the ground with it, this tire iron. This poor man wouldn't have had a clue what was happening. he wouldn't have had the first clue. And it's not like he could have run. Now, I've mentioned that he could walk a couple of steps. I don't actually know. I believe there was only the two of them, so I don't know how he made it up the steps. I'm presuming it was with a lot of trouble, but he certainly couldn't run. So she beats him to the ground, and then she makes him sit in the chair. Now, remember, I mentioned the chair with the full-length mirror in front of it. And she makes him sit there, and she said it was so he could watch himself. So he could watch himself and what she was going to do to him. And over the next 3 days, she just takes her time torturing this poor man, this poor vulnerable man. I mean, she pulls his teeth out with pliers, one by one. And he's watching this in the mirror. And she says he needed to see what he deserved. That was her wording of why she wanted him in front of the mirror. She kept him alive so she could fulfill every murderous whim she had. Okay? She would alternate between the tire iron and a hammer. Okay? Beating him relentlessly. She beat him around the head, which I'd mentioned when he was found. He had a fractured skull. He had numerous fractures, so it could have been from the tire iron, the hammer, or both. Okay? Then, at some point during that 3 days, while he's alive, she walks up with a 3-inch nail and using the hammer, hammers it into his skull. He's alive. And then, after she's had her fun, and she's tortured this poor man for 3 days. She slashes his throat. And, excuse me, she has stabbed him over 50 times during these 3 days. But then, eventually on the 3rd day, she slashes his throat. But that isn't the cause of death, as I've mentioned. It was actually, she strangled him with a TV wire, like an extension cord. Okay, and that's how she ended this innocent man's life. That's how she did it. And you need to watch the interview. After you've watched this, please go away and watch the interview, because when the interviewer asks her, why was that? Why did you feel you needed to do that? Because it was just necessary. It was just necessary. She doesn't even elaborate really for him. I just found it necessary. Just very, like I say, very, very calm. Now, when she'd done all of that, she then dismembers him. She removes his legs first, and then his arms. His arm, sorry. And then she packs him into the metal bin. And then she borrows Edward's car. So it turns out that Edward didn't have anything to do with it, which is at least what she says. She takes the full blame of everything from beginning to end. I do wonder, how did you, in the picture he doesn't look a light man. I don't know, how did she get him back down the stairs? How did she lift him into the chair? There's just certain question marks that I have. Now, considering we know how she feels about snitches, she's not going to say if anyone did help her. But she takes full blame for it. She takes full culpability for this crime. And she says she borrows Edward's car, she drives to the church, and she sets him on fire. And she says, Edward was innocent, I acted alone. She holds her hands up to it, okay? She also hints that Terry wasn't her first murder either, right? She actually says informants and child molesters should be killed, period. So that's where she comes from. Now, when she says this, the police go away and they start an investigation into unsolved murders that kind of match what she did to Terry. Okay, so they do look into her claim that she has got more victims. Okay, so it's just saying that, look, it was this snitching thing, it's explained that it was so important to Angela. Now, Angela herself, okay, she was born on the 29th of November 1975, all right? Now, right back to the age of 10, that she had a very rough upbringing. There's no excuse. I don't make excuses for anything. And more to the point, if you watch the interview, neither does she. The interviewer says, do you think people should feel sorry for you given your upbringing? She's like, no, not at all. Very matter of fact. But she did have a history of mental illness. She was hospitalised at the age of 10, as I've said. She had a long history of depression. She was raised in the foster care system. It says she was abused both physically and sexually whilst in the foster care system. In her teenage years, that's when she began taking drugs. And she would sell drugs and also sell herself to pay for her habit. She had 4 kids over the years. She doesn't talk about them in the interview. In fact, when he asks her about it and she says she doesn't want to talk about it, it gets a little bit awkward, you know, because she cuts it dead there. It's the one time you see a very small glimmer of emotion at all, if you could call it an emotion, but you see a very small glimmer. But she doesn't want to talk to them. But from what I've read, it would appear that her 4 children live with her biological mum, which I'm confused by. I'm confused if that's actually factual, because her biological mum obviously didn't bring her up and she was raised in the foster care system, so, but she can take on her children. I don't know, so I'm taking that with a grain of salt, and she certainly didn't give anything away. And from being brought up on the streets, basically, through the foster care system, it says that she just got this edge to her, and she became very, very, very violent. Now, she seems quite intelligent. Now, I don't know. But when you watch the interview, she certainly doesn't seem stupid. I will say that, okay? She certainly doesn't seem stupid, okay? Now, even after confessing, okay, and as we know, she has confessed. She said it was just her. It was only her who did it. She, as I've said, she comes from this no snitching mentality, this street mentality, like this street code of conduct, okay? But even after confessing, she then goes on to plead not guilty, okay? She shows no remorse whatsoever, and she does plead not guilty, all right? Now, we get to the 28th of August 2009, so the end of that month, and she's indicted on charges including first-degree murder and kidnapping and abandonment or concealment of a dead body, okay? Edward is also indicted on the charges of abandonment or concealment of a dead body. Okay, he's not indicted on first-degree murder, he's indicted on that. Now, the prosecution want the death penalty. That's what they want. That's what they're going for. Okay? So, while the police are investigating and getting the cases together and everything else, they don't find that Angela is connected to any other murders. They can't find anything. It's just this one. Okay? So it takes until the 22nd of March 2012. So it's like 3 years later. Okay? And Angela comes back and she accepts a plea deal. Alright? And she changes her plea to guilty. And she pleads guilty to first-degree murder of Terry, alright? And it takes the death penalty off the table. Okay? So in April of 2012, and at this point she's aged 36, she's sentenced to life, natural life, no parole, no, she'll never see the light of day again, plus 14 years. The American justice system, I'll tell you what, it always confuses me. It's like, we're going to give you 1,000 years. So it's life, no parole, plus 14 years on top of it, okay? I believe this is possibly for the other charges. Do you remember I mentioned the robbery charge? She was actually already being pulled in for. So I think it was relating to that, okay? So as I've mentioned, this interview then goes ahead, all right? And for some reason it's making the rounds again, which is why I've chose to cover this story again. I have found a few more details that I didn't have in the original, plus the quality of the video was horrific. But yeah, I've said it a few times, go away and look at the interview, and I can't emphasize enough how cold and calm this woman is. She genuinely is. And when asked, you know, do you have any regrets or anything, and she says, well, yeah, I'd have kept him alive for a week. And it says, the interviewer says, was it justice in that courtroom? Because this interview's after her sentencing. And she says, no, I don't. Basically, I don't see it as being justice. Was it justice in the courtroom? She says, no, I don't think it was. And the interviewer says, why? And she goes, well, I should have gotten the death penalty. And there's like I say, it's about a 15-minute long interview. I'm not going to go through it all with you because I would recommend going away and watching it. But at the very end, there's about 30 seconds of the video left, if that. And we get to the end and she calls time on it. And as I've said, she's been very calm. You could even say, as cold and calm as she is, and she says, you know, she's been in jail for these 3 years. She says she's happy now it's all over. She can go to prison because she reckons the conditions in the jail were horrific. And so, it's not the Ritz. You're not going to have good conditions in there. But she says, well, I'm going to be with my sisters. I don't think she means blood sisters. She just means people that she knows. She genuinely doesn't appear to be bothered about spending the rest of her life in prison, even though she's only 36 years old. But would I dare to say even slightly charismatic? It's weird to say that, knowing what she's done to this man. But on my understanding of a psychopath, I'm not going to throw it out there because I could look like a complete fool by saying it, but it's the closest I could think of to that's what I'm watching. An actual, not just a thrown flippantly out there, oh, you're a psychopath. An actual psychopath. It definitely what it seems like you're looking at. And they do say psychopaths are intelligent and they are very charismatic. And they do have that element to them. And at the very end of the interview, after being, just staring and being very calm, she kind of stands up and she laughs. And she says, "That was good shit, man." And she goes, "Make it good, look good, please." And she says it, but she then sees the camera. The camera's held down. And she goes, "Oh, you're gonna play that bit. You're gonna play the end as well." And he's like, "Well, And she just walks off. And it's just, she goes, "Oh no, don't." Something like that. But it doesn't even really seem like she's that bothered. And she walks out. And there was just, when you see that bit, I don't believe what we were watching was an act. Because of what she done. We know what she did. We know what she did to that poor man. So what we're watching isn't an act. But I think the switch between the personalities and how she could turn on what would appear quite a charming side to her says psychopath to me. It just does. It does. Not that I'm diagnosing anyone. It's just what it seems to me. But, yeah, it's just very, very sad that this poor man, he had no one. He had no family. And again, as has happened in many of the stories I've done, Jennifer Doherty, Gemma Hayter, there's Sean Rossington. There's a lot of stories that I've done where these vulnerable adults just meet the wrong people. And it's so, so sad. And, it's just, Terry Neely he just had the unfortunate, poor Tom. I don't know how he met her. I don't know whether it was the drugs or what. I don't know how he came into contact with her, but it's just very unfortunate that he did. But that was the horrific story of Angela Simpson. Okay. Just awful. But please go away and have a look at the interview. I'd love to know your opinions of it. Drop a comment in. Let me know your opinion of the interview. I'm very curious. I'd love to know other people's, thoughts on it. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Excuse me. I am here every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. All these stories do go up on my pre-recorded channel, pre-recorded videos at the weekend. But thank you so much for joining me again. I really do appreciate it. And I will see you next week. Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you.